you so much for that introduction. My name is Tiara Nlovu. I'm the founder of Baja Archives. I'm so grateful to be here. Thankful to everybody who has contributed to the gathering of MAC. I know this is our first time since 2019, and so this is really exciting to be here. And I'm thrilled to be joined by a longtime creator, collaborator, and definitely a friend, Cache Knowles.
Hi, I am Cache Knowles, the founder of Eyes of Bahamian Bay. What she said.
Just speaking to a little bit about the MAC conference, this is our first time coming to a conference like this, and it's been really inspiring so far. In fact, just last night during the keynote presentation, one of our presenters was speaking about challenges with her practice that are rooted in the fact that her community doesn't really have a buy-in, right, to this museum world and to the cultural aspects. And so that inspired me. I had a light bulb moment right there in the amphitheater. We're going to deviate from script, so it's no longer beyond the four walls, but building without walls. Because I think what we're going to talk about today is really about how we use social media, first and foremost, in creating a museum, rather than perhaps the traditional trajectory that a museum
Exist.
Yeah, it exists, and they promote what's happening within the museum space on social media. But we definitely see it a little bit different. So our main platforms are Facebook and Instagram. We have dabbled in TikTok a little bit, but for anybody, I'm sure you guys can relate. It's just not our generation right now, but we are working towards it.
Getting back.
But across all our platforms, I mean, for myself with Baja Archives, reaching about 10,000 community members, and then for Eyes of Bahamian Bay, I think closer to 20,000.
Yeah.
So combined, kind of 30,000 Bahamians that are here in Nassau
And abroad.
Family Islands,
Right.
and abroad, kind of across the world. And we make daily posts, or at least try to make daily posts about Bahamian history and culture. And for me, that's an extension of the work that I do professionally. So I'm a curatorial research associate at the Norton Museum of Art in West Palm Beach. That just means that I assist all of our curators. We have 5 collecting departments there. I've in the past worked with the NAGB, this is near and dear to my heart, as well as museums in Atlanta, which is where I got my degree. And I'd actually like to invite Cache now to speak a little bit more about her route, because I think I have a very cookie cutter, I studied art history and history, did the honors thesis and everything in the humanities, whereas your background, please share a little bit about that.
I'm a scientist. Don't know how I got up here doing this. But so I did biology in school, and then I went on to do my master's in marketing, to do a science business of sorts. And I've always loved culture. I've always loved history, but I don't think at the time I saw a space for me to be in a career in that path.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I think that you're definitely a cultural worker with what you do, though,
what
right?
I do
so
now.
You ended up there.
Right, so stumbled upon here by, how did I get here? I went backpacking in Southeast Asia, going completely left, and I was like immersed in like a lot of culture, a lot of history, learning about different cultures, and I realized that I didn't feel like the Bahamas had a space that sort of just celebrated culture like on an everyday basis, and that's something that I wanted to see in some sort. So I never thought anything about that first train of thought, but on coming back to the Bahamas after traveling for 3 months, I had sort of like an epiphany to take the Bahamian language and create an Instagram page of it. So I created the page in 2019 and just started posting about different words, brought up see, Valmata bay, where we going, like all type of different things. And people loved it. People were able to engage in our language. That slowly evolved into posting about culture in general, and has just been evolving ever since to what we see today.
And have you, when you were growing up, did you go to museums? I mean, for myself, I was always immersed in the visual arts, whether it was in school. But did you have that experience, or
No.
right? But you still ended up here,
Right, so
heritage professional, right? So,
Right. I never went to museums growing up. I always had an interest in, I think, observing Bahamian life, like actually learning about it. And then my mom and grandmother were very impactful in like learning about like stories. So my grandmother would come here, sit down, let me tell you this story. And I would just spend hours with her, just listening to her life growing up, listening to how hard she had to work, what it was like growing up in the Bahamas. So that really, I guess, influenced the way that I exist as a Bahamian. So it's something that I've always been passionate about, but I didn't follow the academic route, per se.
But I think it's still very impactful. I know that when we spoke before the, just kind of brainstorming for this session, and you mentioned storytelling, and then I was like, yes, that's exactly what's at the core of what we do. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have that background.
Right.
But when we think about building without walls and building space for our culture, I think it really is storytelling, and storytelling for those who, like you, didn't grow up going to museums or feeling like welcomed in that space. So that's kind of what I want to move forward with as we frame our discussion on our two platforms. We're also thinking about the themes of the conference, of course, particularly transformation and relevancy, but we do sprinkle in some other stuff there. So you had mentioned that you started in 2019. I should also say, I said she's a friend, but also an inspiration for me. So Baja Archives, I started the beginning of 2020. Did not anticipate, as any of us did, that we would be in a virtual world. But I was in Atlanta. I had been there for about 4 years at that point. But was researching historical photography for my thesis, and then running across these images of Bahamians or the Bahamas. And I needed a way to get it back to the community. So I wasn't as immersed back into the network, like the arts world here. So I thought, well, I'm just going to post them online. No idea that it would grow at any rate. Thought it would just be me nerding out, which I think you can relate to as well. But we're just going to share, I think, the post that helped us really start to see that the work we were doing was relevant and the potential impact.
Where it could go,
Exactly. So the image you see here, this is James, also known as Jimmy Wells. I came across this photograph through Google Arts and Culture, and they were digitizing the entire photo archive of Life magazine. And Life magazine had done, hundreds of features of the Bahamas, things happening here. But again, it was always like a tourist. It wasn't about Bahamians. So the reason that Jimmy was photographed was because he was the last person to see a family that was sailing in Abaco before they were unfortunately murdered at sea. So they came to kind of interview him to see, well, what did you know?
What's the story?
But again, it wasn't about him. It wasn't about what does he do every day or who's his family. They didn't actually even have his name listed. They only said, I can't remember the name of the murder now, like the name that they dubbed it, but it was like murder mystery. And that's really what caught me. I was like, what do you mean murder mystery? Like, did this man, is he a part of, did he pass away? Was he, but I posted this. I had about 200 followers or so, but had some people in Abaco resharing the image and the story. And all of a sudden, I get this DM, and this guy's like, hey, that's my granddad. And I was like, oh, what do you mean that's your granddad? And he was like, but he's never told me this story. And I'm like, no. This is your granddad, but you don't know anything.
This story, right?
You don't know that he was involved in this kind of international spectacle of this murder. What do you mean? And then by extension, are you saying that me finding this is now like helping your family and your archive and your history? So that was really impactful for me to see that. And I just was like, this is exactly what I want
to be doing.
And what I want the impact to be, what I want every post to inspire.
To get stories told and heard and discussed and engaged with.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. So then.
So this is one of the, I think, third posts that I did, which was the breakdown between the Bahamian Standard English and like the actual meanings of these different words that we say. So this had a very big impact. Like I, at the time, had like 200 followers as well. And it got like 30,000, a reach of 30,000 on the second day. So people were seeing these words and being like, this is so fun. These are things that we say on a daily basis, but we never get to actually see it and hold it.
Right.
And
you're
so
downplaying that a little bit. She went viral on her third post, and this is the post.
this is the post. And this is when I realized like, oh wow, people want to know about this. Like this is something that is fun. My favorite word on here is Velmutta. So that means, oh my gosh. So I mean, it's just really, it's fun. And it's really something that I think that, especially in the Bahamas, myself growing up, like, I don't think that I was always encouraged to speak in my Bahamian tongue. So I always spent a lot of time talking Bahamian, but being corrected. And it's like, I understood the importance of being able to do both, but I also felt like my Bahamian identity was being sort of like watered down. It's just like, okay, be Bahamian, but like less, or like know when to switch up. So that really sort of just like, was just like, no, let's be Bahamian and like, let's be more Bahamian and like really see how far we can reach. And this was the post that did it. And oddly enough, I did not create this post. My grandmother actually created this 15 years prior to me. And she put it on a t-shirt, which I basically stole from her.
You continue the family,
I continue the
legacy,
right.
in a sense.
Which is really interesting, even from a historical standpoint. It's like she had foresight for me to even be interested in this type of, I guess, avenue. So it's like for her to do that 15 years before and not knowing that this would sort of be my career and the thing that sort of catapulted me into what I'm doing is, I mean, a story in itself, which I think is very cool.
Yeah. And then a little bit of what you do now and how that's kind of transformed, right?
So, like I said, it evolved from just like posting words every day to just posting individual words. So like how many, literally every word I could possibly post and defining what those mean. So this is no broadupsy. This is when you don't have no manners. You come into a space and you don't say morning, morning, morning. In the Bahamas, when you come anywhere, you have to say good morning, but not just good morning. You have to say morning, morning, morning 3 times fast. Protocol.
No other way.
No other way. If you don't, you will be asked, like, do you have broadupsy? And then that's a whole nother conversation.
You'll just be assumed to have
none. Exactly. None. So I think that what made Eyes of Bahamian Bay exist and do as well as it's done now is that I know that for a fact that like I wasn't seeing these words. I wasn't able to hold these words growing up, but Eyes of Bahamian Bay created a space and a platform for these words to be held and engaged with and shared with family members and shared with non-Bahamians who were abroad in school talking Bahamian, and the friends are like, what? What are you saying? So people actually would message and say, man, like I get to send these actual digital posts to my friends to be like, when I say that, this is what I mean.
Right.
So you learn the dictionary from Eyes of Bahamian Bay because I'm not talking Bahamian anymore. So we were able to engage with things that we've only ever heard, never seen spelled out, other than like in a dictionary. So we do have a Bahamian dictionary, but it was a thing that was more accessible to everyone, who even people who doesn't want to read books.
Right.
Per se.
Right. And I think that's really powerful to talk about, you know, how we can begin to interact with our language in new ways and the spoken word. And then this might seem like a very stark comparison, but when I was hearing you talk about the spoken word, I was thinking back to times when our visual language of like Bahamian monuments and spaces became really relevant in my work. So the photos here on the right are unidentified fire, but for anybody that's Bahamian in the room, you know this is Bay Street, right? I think this stop sign might still be there, actually. Like, no joke. So the only way that I actually came across these photos was there was a keyword tag and it just said Bahama, not Bahamas, not Nassau, not New Providence. So when I came across these, and I was like, oh wow, like now I can add more context, right? Like this is my wish. This is I want to input the Bahamian aspect into this visual archive, and you just can't do that when the person who took the photograph just tags it Bahama, right? You need that additional aspect. And these photos too, also, when I saw them, I was able to post them and ask our community, hey, does anybody know about when this could have been? There's been many fires on Bay Street, but like, does anybody help to recognize this person? It was underscoring my wish to highlight the everyday moments in Bahamian history. And going back to our first point, right, the shifting the culture and the mindset to see the community buy in to that these everyday moments are valuable.
They matter.
Right, and that they do matter would, it help inspire people to be more engaged.
And then also I feel like it inspired people to also go and dig up through their collection of like old photos and send them in and be like, can you post this? Like, this is the background story. Yes. So it gave people an opportunity to be a part of it and to have control over what they saw, because they're sending it to you and then it gets posted and then they get to see the engagement of other people engaging with their personal archives. Yes. So I think that was a huge.
That was a good series. I'm forgetting, but this is why you have good friends to remind you. But yes, I think you're absolutely right. This idea that you could submit as well to be a part of this digital museum, really starting to see yourself and the community
in the space. And like I had people submit words to like, okay, do this word next. Like I remember I had like 300 submissions over time, and I'm like, wow.
It's just me one.
Just me. It's a lot. But people get to be a part of it.
But aside from the everyday moments, which I think are important, I also was highlighting the monumental that weren't in our history books. So this image is from the Burma Road riots. And I certainly recall learning about the riots, but never really seeing photos, never seeing videos. And certainly we had a lot of people who were, I think, shocked to see images of Black Bahamian women at the forefront. Not because we ever thought that they weren't there or anything like that, but
the story wasn't told with them at the forefront.
Exactly. The written history just didn't reflect that. And so this was really a good one. And I actually had a comment somebody wrote that said, wow, and to think I had yet to find any record of uprisings to date. Proud, and then they had the Bahamian flag. So that I think also speaks to the gap that we're trying to fill between the history books and what we and
the access. I think it's really the access. It's like it could be in the books. It's important for it to be in the books. It's important for it to be documented. But if everyone doesn't have access to it in a way that they can digest it, then we can't engage in it. We can't make it relevant to everyone. So this was one that I did on Sir Lyndon Pinland throwing the mace out of the window. That was a huge historical moment in the Bahamian history, and I wrote it in our language in this is the latest gossip on the street. Let me tell you about this story. I mean, it was like every Bahamian knows this story and knows what happened, but because I told it as if I had seen it with my own eyes, as if I was talking about my next door neighbor, and I was just telling like my friend, like, let me tell you what happened. A lot of people was like, wow, like this is such a fun and unique story to hear. And like, even in the caption, I wrote it in full, like, let me tell you something. This man threw the mace out the window. Like, it was a sight. Like, you had to be there.
You had to be there.
And I had people comment and be like, wow, like if history was taught to me in this way where it was more engaging, I think I would have been more interested in like these very important stories. And I think the way that I place it, you were able to see yourself in the story. So Lyndon Pinland is, the first prime minister of the Bahamas. So he's such a high figure, but like seeing it in this way, it's just like, okay, I get it. I could have done that. Like, you get to see yourself in these very impactful moments that end up being the stories that we were told. So, yeah.
And for you, could you speak a little bit about how you get to that point, right? Like you are reading the history books.
Right.
For myself, and I'll speak to it, I guess, after you do as well. But just like your process and how you get to the final product.
Right. So I think I feel like I've always been an observer of Bahamian history or Bahamian life. So just someone who's always just watching the way that Bahamians interact with each other. They are in the Bahamas. So I think having this story, I digest the history from the books. And basically I'm like, okay, how can I put a twist on this to make this fun and engaging for like the everyday person that's like not really into history or not really into like reading books? How can I make it fun and engaging for them? How do I make it interactive? And so putting the Bahamian, like saying it as if it's a story that I saw and witnessed myself, made it like very fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which is also, as I'm sure you guys are identifying now, what I see in Cachet, that she's an educator, right? And she's transforming that, just to drop our conference theme in there. But for myself, I think I'm doing something similar, but also a little bit different. So I am searching archives, high and low, UB Special Collections, shout out to Rosemary, and personal archives, just looking for those kind of underrepresented moments. We can all attest, and we'll talk a little bit about this when we talk about independence, right? We know the photos that are the same kind of 20, 25, the Decca photos that you see.
Yeah, all the time.
And even when it's the individuals like Sir Lyndon Pinland, like you only really see maybe 5 kinds of portraits of him,
right?
In these very particular moments, not him with his family when he's celebrating his 39th birthday, and things like that. So those are always fun to bring out, but just to give some insight on not only the impact we're having, but just the way we are still operating, I think, in a way that museum workers can attest to. Right, and then the transforming of identity.
Right. Yeah. So I think with Eyes of Bahamian Bay, it's very I do a lot of different stuff. But one of the things was sort of transforming the way that Bahamians see themselves. So I think that it gave a platform for Bahamians to see themselves, but also break the norms that a Bahamian is this shape. Like, you have to do this, you have to eat this, you have to like this, you have to listen to this in order to be a Bahamian. So I remember I did this post of, okay, we talked about what is it mean to be a Bahamian, but let's talk about what we're Bahamian, but what do we not do? And so I had people say, I don't like John Canoe. You just don't say that. You just don't say that. But there were people who were Bahamians who don't like John Canoe. And then there would be another person in the comment, me too. So they got to see themselves as like, okay, we're both Bahamian. We've never said this out loud, but we risk being our passports taken away from us. And we found a person that understands, like, okay, me too. So it was sort of a community being built around the identity of what it means to be Bahamian, the identity of celebrating Bahamianism, even though you don't have every single quality it is to be Bahamian, because Bahamian comes in different shapes, forms, sizes, and sort of it's still a place to celebrate your identity. Well,
I think you've done that so well to create space for all kinds of Bahamians. And I think everybody knows who works in museums. That's the goal of the museum as well, right? I would hope that there's not a museum out there that's like, no, we only want to be, we want to increase our outreach. We want to make space. So I think you do that very, very well. And for me, when I think about Baja Archives and the work of expanding the space, it transcends kind of the language or customs, like, liking John Canoe, liking Cobb salad. Especially for me, I'm Bahamian, American, South African, multi-hyphenate. But I wanted to show this photograph. This is a Bahamian family who emigrated to Key West in the early 1900s. And in that first 2 decades at the turn of the century, there was about 10,000 Bahamians who made that move to the South Florida region. And when I posted this, somebody commented and said, "Thank you for talking about the Bahamian community in South Florida." Because when we come here, we're being told to just blend in, right? You're not supposed to act Bahamian. You're not supposed to
be proud.
Yeah, be proud.
Just be quiet.
And so I think it's important as we talk about including, Bahamians that are, as we say, born, bred, dead, Bahamian, who don't relate to some of those aspects. Also including and validating when the Bahamian hyphenates, the Bahamian Canadian, and things like that.
And then to add to that, through the actual work that I've done, I've had so many Bahamian hyphenated Canadian, American, Austrian say I know nothing about the Bahamas because I didn't grow up in the Bahamas, but my parent is Bahamian, and I've learned so much about my heritage through this page, and I feel more connected to the Bahamian culture because I'm learning, and I feel like I can now say oh, I'm Bahamian because at least I know living through the mace out the window but before there was no access to learning about it other than okay, I had to buy a book or visit the Bahamas. So I made people who had probably never visited the Bahamas but had a Bahamian parent learn and have access to their culture.
And then kind of piecing the puzzle, putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
Right.
Oh, my mom used to say that. Oh,
that's what it means. Okay, I can use that too now.
Yeah.
So
my grandma used to always
do that.
Round me for that. Right. So now I get it. So I think in all these ways we're of course, transforming kind of the narrative that you build around what it means to celebrate your culture, how you then relate it to the museum sense. And then I think that relates really well to kind of your more...
Right, and it's so again, just sort of advocating for our language, advocating for our culture, even how you said people who migrated to South Florida, it's just don't be loud, don't be Bahamian. It's just well, why not? Why can't I be proud of, where I come from, proud of my culture? So just advocating for, I guess, the norms that have been taught to us of okay, don't talk Bahamian, don't do these things, or even to do these things. This is how you be a Bahamian. There's only one way. We can't break that norm. So validating our culture, acknowledging and speaking our culture, and speaking our culture as much as possible, and speaking our language as much as possible. Yeah.
No, but I think that just this post alone hits so many different marks, right? It's addressing the gap in the written history, right? It needs to be acknowledged, right? And then you need to validate it. So it's when you speak about school, I remember for myself too in high school, I had a teacher who he's from England and heard me speaking to my friends. And he was like, "Tiara, you just switched so well." And I was like, "I don't really know what you mean by that."
Yeah,
And I don't like the way you said that, actually. But to be validated in that sense that this, it's not, it doesn't need to be a switch. It's this is just another aspect of my being.
Right, who I am. Right, exactly. And I mean, the people that I was corrected by was my parents and my grandmother who taught me so much. But I definitely, I think, want the space to be open up of, okay, well, can we talk Bahamian sometimes? When can we do that? I mean, I know I'm about to one day be hey, what's up, y'all? I don't know. But breaking those norms and being able to be seen and heard in our accents.
Absolutely. And I think that this is also an effort kind of colonizing. I think that's kind of what you're getting at as well. And for myself, I think so much about how these very important moments of Bahamian history have kind of been watered down or whitewashed, really, just to be frank. So these are two images from a series that I received from a private archive. This is the first Independence Day in Freeport. And first of all, when you see images of the first Independence Day celebrations in 1973, and so that's 50 years ago now, you only see Nassau, and you see, now I'm blanking on the name.
Prince Charles.
So, yes, Prince Charles. where were they at? Now I feel like a bad Bahamian. I can't. Bad Bahamian historian. Why can't I think of?
Is it the fort?
Yeah, the fort. Yeah, y'all know what I mean. Okay,
Fort Charlotte.
Fort. I don't
Montague.
know. Anyways,
Castle, one of those. Let's just name all the forts.
So sorry. But you see these images of Prince Charles next to Sir Lyndon Pinland,
yeah.
and Mrs. Pinland, and it's just the official ceremony, right?
Yeah.
Where they're bestowing. They're just kind of, here is
Your independence.
Your independence. But you know,
where were the everyday Bahamians in that
Exactly.
process? Like, why there's not a lot of photos of independence, like a handful.
Right.
And it's just like, well, what about the people? Like, what about the everyday person who was experiencing this as a Bahamian? They have a story within the story.
Right.
So where is the photographer who's taking the photo of the 7-year-old who probably doesn't remember this experience but was there?
right.
And I
Right.
think that's important of like telling a story.
Right.
It depends on who was behind the lens, and then also too, what was the narrative that was trying to be
Absolutely.
portrayed and
Absolutely.
captured.
I mean, the lens, like theoretically and literally,
Mhm.
right? Because whoever is taking these photographs, and this is actually Tony Casillo, and he is American and was just visiting. He now lives in Freeport, in between America and Freeport, but not a Bahamian taking these
Right.
images. And so, again, how are we engaging with other photographers and you know, we're American photographers at that time,
Right.
thinking about photographing Black Bahamians,
Right.
or is this kind of the anomaly here? Again, not because Black Bahamians didn't exist.
It's
but
just
if we
not the
go-
narrative, right?
If we go based off of the visual history that we see in the books
Mhm.
and when what's typical, what's printed on the billboards
Right.
and the roundabouts, we don't see images like
no,
this.
we don't see
Um,
Bahamians.
And I think also it's really important to point out too, this was Freeport. So this was not the nation's capital.
Right.
But still these celebrations happening. And I think that's always really, really exciting. There's a quote that we had talked about too. That-
right.
just about, of course, history is the story of those who won.
Right.
The story of those who were in power, who stayed in power. They got to control that narrative.
The narrative. And I
So-
think that even like adds to like the language. It's just like the reason why a language has been taught not to be spoken is for a certain reason. Like this is the narrative that sticks. So how do we break down those barriers and figure out a way for them both to exist
Right.
on the same level, on the same playing field? And why was our language portrayed in a negative way?
Yeah.
So you have to ask these questions and sort of dismantle what we know and what we've accepted.
Right. Right. And I think that's where our work moves away from maybe just content creation,
Right.
and becomes this kind of social justice tool,
Yeah.
right? That we can say, yes, we're showing you that Pinland threw the mace out the window, but we're also making sure you feel empowered to then share that story again.
Right.
Or if you see yourselves in these images as a Black Bahamian, you feel more empowered.
Included.
Right,
Right.
or Bahamians at large, right? I feel like my stuff does end up being more of the Black Bahamian experience,
Right.
but I think it applies across the board. If you can see yourself represented in these spaces, you feel more
Included and like likely to engage or likely to want to know more, be more curious about, okay, like, well, if this is Freeport, like who's holding the independence photos in Nassau?
And if
Share
anybody
them.
knows, please share them. Please.
Share them. Google has
found
nothing.
I found these maybe, I think this was 2020 because
Yeah,
I
this
reposted
is
them
one
in
of the early
2021.
ones.
And this was, I mean, everybody was like, oh my gosh, I have never really seen, that was the response. I had never really seen images like this. Like, I'm so happy to see these.
Yeah.
So still on the hunt 3 years
Right,
later.
yeah.
We can do it right in time for 50th. I'm sure we'll find more. But these are examples of a kind of the static posts that we
Right.
do, but we have also engaged with video. So we just have 2 examples for you guys.
Our history matters. Through our history, we see moments of success, moments of unity, moments of joy, moments of resistance, moments of celebration. Moments that we all know, and moments we are just now discovering. Baja Archives will be partnering with the Tin Furl Pop-Up Park at the Dundas Theatre Grounds to bring a selection of historical photos and stories to the general public. Let's celebrate our history together.
That was a fun one to work on.
so good.
Thank you. So as the video shared, this was something that I put out for Independence Day 2020, but was also in partnership with Tin Furl, which is a local group that was hosting just a variety of food
market.
vendors at the Dundas Theatre grounds. And I had worked with them to have an in-person kind of pop-up where we had printouts of some of the photos that we'd shown on Baja Archives. And just, again, this idea of how do we bring more people to these stories that are hopefully inspiring and empowering so that they have that first step, right?
At least they're in it.
Right, they're in it, and then they're going to do their own digging, and then they become like you and I, that are like super
Involved,
and loving it. So that was a form that I thought of kind of advocating, and of course also the beginning Art History Matters at that time was definitely taking inspiration from Black Lives Matter and the socio-political ties of kind of the blank matters movements. And so I was thinking that would help, again, transcend cultural boundaries, the borders in a sense of when someone is identifying as Bahamian American or on both ends. So then next we have your video of Joe Canoe.
So the rhythm of our soul, our Bahamian culture, our beloved Junkanoo. A street festival, we describe it, to someone who had never heard of a word so sweet. But we know Junkanoo, an indescribable, unimaginable experience, an explosion of Bahamian. Junkanoo in the Bahamas is a street festival with colorful costumes made from crepe paper and cardboard, with dancing and movement to music made from instruments you've never heard of before. The goatskin drum, the cowbell, the conch. Throw in the brass section, your whistles, synchronized chanting, and you're only halfway to understanding what Junkanoo is all about. You gotta feel it in your spirit, man. Junkanoo is an experience unlike any other. Once you hear them lick off the rhythm of that first sweet sound, and you feel the beat in your chest, you realize we are all Junkanoo.
Well, I hope all the Bahamians were dancing as I was as well.
So yeah, I have also gone into video content. So I think mine is a little bit different because I have to actually draw inspiration from different concepts. So like creating like a theme and then putting it together and narrating, okay, what is it that you're looking at? And explaining what it's all about. So I did one for Junkanoo. I did one for like the different instruments that we use in Junkanoo. And this got like, I think 24 or 25,000 views on Instagram because I think Junkanoo had been seen before. You just see it. You just see Junkanoo with the drums and the music and the dancers, but it had never had a narration so someone who's not familiar with Junkanoo can follow and understand while you're visually seeing it and be like, oh, okay, I'm understanding how all the concepts come together with the costumes and the instruments, and I'm understanding the bigger picture of Junkanoo. And this was actually, this inspiration came from someone who had done a similar video of Bahamian food, but they were not Bahamian. And I was just like, I could do that.
As we always say, biggity.
I could do that. And I was
In
like,
the best ways.
yeah, I'm like, why can't we have Bahamian creators creating and telling the story of Bahamians, you know? It's just like, we don't need other people to come here and be like, here's what Junkanoo is all about. It's just like, no, I can explain the wider world about what's going on in our country. So I'm gonna keep doing it.
As you should.
Yeah. But yeah.
And then I think too, what I just kind of put together, both of these videos, again, your journey different than mine, and even in the content that we create, it's just slightly different because I'm searching for the archival, and
Right.
you are pulling more broadly,
Right.
and I think which is, you know, I think great. I'm not trying to say it in a bad way. I don't know why it sounded like that. But we still had these historical aspects, right? There's videos over the years of Junkanoo. I saw 1990 pop up.
Right.
I know some of the photos, the videos that I pulled and the clips are from the 50s and the
Right.
60s. Again, these moments of like Sarando Fox. And I think that's also very important to acknowledge too, that you're explaining Junkanoo and what it is now, but also referencing
Going back
the past.
and why it's important. Yeah.
Right. It almost feels like a little bit of like a mini exhibition in a way. Like when you go through a museum space, and again, I'm biased to art museums.
Right.
So I'm always thinking of when you're curating a space and the experience that you have somebody go
Right.
through. And what do you put first? Do you do this thing thematically? Do you do
Right.
it
How do you actually tell a
chronologically?
story?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, storytelling.
Right, goes back to storytelling and figuring out how to tell the story in a way that captures the audience attention. And I feel like our generation, well, not even our generation, but the world right now has such a short attention span. So I'm always like, okay, this is such a huge concept. How can I put like a whole century into literally 5 seconds?
Right,
Because
right.
that's all the attention that anyone has. So it definitely takes a lot of, all right, what do people like?
Right.
And going from there.
Yeah. And then as we kind of start to close out, just wanted to chat about like the importance of collaboration. I think in the same spirit of the MAC conference and bringing us all together. And when we think about the future and how do we continue building, this was
Collaboration
a
we
series
did
that we did
in 2021. 2020.
20.
We've been here a while.
But this was in honor of National Heroes Day,
yeah.
which is in October.
Something.
Second Monday in October.
You got it.
And we just were thinking about how we could expand beyond,
Nash.
right, the like 10 to 15 national heroes that always
Right.
get recognized. And not to, I think we did absolutely recognize
We
them. but
recognized
did
them,
the whole
yeah.
month, so we had 30 people, or
Right.
31. 31 people that we acknowledged who
But-
still had these really
Right.
important
Stories.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's the thing, like, we sort of just uplift the same 10 people over and over and over again, like, because they were really the movers and shakers of the Bahamas. But I think,
and also what we have really the most resources and content
right,
on.
like, I mean, if it's 10 people who like really built the Bahamas, we have their whole story just laid out at our fingertips. But I think great, but it's at a disadvantage to the people who maybe wasn't the movers or shakers, but still contributed a great deal, who were the individuals that were on the back line, but they still had a story in the story, but their story wasn't heard.
Right.
They
Right.
wasn't uplifted.
Right, and so here we have like Andre Rogers, who was the first Bahamian in the major leagues. I feel like we had also thought about him because it was right at the time, Jazz Chisholm,
Right.
who is now on the Miami Marlins.
Mhm.
I'm a big supporter. I've Bahamian heritage, which is
Yeah.
coming up if you guys do want to travel there. But I think it was really important for us to start to think about too, like the people who've come before, and so that we could make sure to celebrate those.
Right.
Um,
Because it's these people who did it literally against all odds, and didn't get the attention because social media wasn't around. The story sort of just got moved to the side or not. What?
So we'll kind of just go to the last slide. I don't know if you want to talk about.
Oh, we had to talk about trivia. So I had started trivia on my page, just asking random questions like, "What's the national fish of the Bahamas?" You don't know?
Anybody?
The marlin. So I started doing trivia, and basically this is how our collaboration came up, where she messaged and was just like, "Hey, if I did the questions where you post, the
Like
questions,
post the trivia, and because it
Right.
was already kind of a platform you had or you
Right.
started. It was Trivia Thursday.
yeah,
And so I was like, well, this is a great part for us
opportunity, right?"
to connect. I think you had posted something that you were like, I tired of
Yeah,
trivia.
it was a
Y'all-
lot. And people loved it so much. So I'd post 5 questions on Thursday, and it would be like just hundreds of comments on each question. And I'm like, I love that you love this, but I'm only one person, and boy,
Right. So when we started to work together, I would take the photographs that I was finding and kind of tie it to a theme
Right.
or something. And so this is Alan Lomax, who I know Amanda had shared a little bit about in the keynote presentation yesterday. But his work is in the Library of Congress and not really identified. People are just kind of like, woman with child or woman with hat. Nothing that really tells you about the person. So then I started digging and I was like, well, why did Alan Lomax come here? That is what inspired these questions.
Right.
And I feel like with this one, I remember
People was so
they were
mad.
very upset because Bahamians are also very competitive and they want to win. So everybody was like, anyway, the correct answer is who was Alan Lomax? They didn't even
know.
But yeah, a really great way that we were able to continue to engage people.
Right.
And I know you'd even done a little bit of it when you did like live videos and live trivia and anniversary kinds of things. So yeah, I know we are on our time. Perhaps we can open now for question and answer or
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much.
Just a note about the Q&A, because we are recording the sessions. If you could ask your question, but if you could repeat it into the microphone just for the.
Okay.
I think I saw.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask a quick question, and lovely to speak to a person who worked together with like there.
Yes.
But I wanted just to ask, when you did your collaboration for the historical piece, did you use the Bahamian language?
No.
Did you- Okay.
No.
I was just wondering if you had a chance to kind of,
Ask a question like,
well, to provide an historical piece,
right,
but lens it through the language.
right,
And then maybe even have a double language where you can have both academic
and
Bahamian, and just almost to see how that would feel, because I'm writing it in my notes thinking, like, this isn't obvious, right? That we would actually switch,
right,
and for lack of a better code,
Mhm.
I don't know what else I'm supposed to say. But in Bermuda, we have a Bermudian as well, it's literally a Bermudian dictionary. But I don't think we've ever sort of transgressed the academic space.
Right.
So just put the language into Bermudian and be able to reach the public, and can that be done and actually just an authority in the museum?
right. I definitely think that like language just we forget about it because all we do is say it. So it's not top of mind of like, wow, this is actually a very powerful tool that we sort of underestimate. I definitely think that there is space for it to be involved in the academic space, but I think we have to collectively, either someone has to stand up and be like, I'm gonna come in here and talk in my Bahamian accent or whatever accent or language, and everyone just has to
Abide.
that's just cachet. That's just how she
it.
talks.
Yeah.
Or we have to collectively, as the academics, decide like, what if we try this? Like, can we try to all talk in our and not have to code switch?
Right. Right.
Either or. Someone either has to just do it, or collectively we decide. Let's go back to our tongue. Yeah.
I think that's a great question and a great point to bring up. And I think
I didn't re-say the question.
No, it's
Sorry.
okay. No, it's okay. I think, but I think even being here in this space, and that's something that we can all consider as we go forward. Like, do we make room, right? Because
Mhm.
do we make space in all of the ways,
Right.
to foster that and cultivate it more?
Yes. Yes.
So I just want to say thank you so much. This is a great presentation. Two-part question. Thinking about the longevity of this, like as it grows into the future,
Mhm.
and then also maybe like the collaborative aspect. So first, I'm wondering, have you considered like the analog side of things? Because digital is amazing, right?
Mhm.
It's necessary. But what happens, God forbid,
Yes.
something happens to like the digital repository? Like,
Right.
I'm wondering, have you thought about that?
Stress.
And then, like, or if IG's like, oh, I don't like your post account. You know?
Right.
And then the other part are, do you have any thoughts or have you considered, maybe for the future, if you're not already doing it, like a collaborative archive or repository among other independent archives like yourself?
You want to go ahead?
So, just repeating the question there, just speaking about the longevity of our platforms and what happens in the digital world if something,
Instagram just dies.
you know, it's happened before. Instagram has gone away for a day and we were like,
Happened to me
what?
last year.
Yeah, we're like, what's going on? How dare Google not work right now?
Yeah.
And then the collaborative aspect beyond us to, our two platforms, our organizations, but other independent archives. And
Right.
I think definitely, I mean, I find myself always in search of other archives to collaborate with.
Right.
Right now, again, I'm in West Palm Beach, so I've been looking at the Palm Beach Historical Society. They're not independent in a sense, but another institution to partner with and just see what they have. And
Yeah.
now speaking to what happens if
Instagram goes
internet
away.
goes bye-bye,
I have not.
I had not thought about it.
I've not. Everything's on Instagram. I have
Right.
not saved any. Even the write-ups that I've done, like it literally, if
No.
it dies, it's just
Right
gone.
on.
No.
It's 800 posts.
I think
so
there
it's
is
so
a way. I'm
much.
pretty sure I've seen a way though that you can it's an external party and you can download everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
we
I
put
should
it, and then we put it and we put it on a hard
do
drive.
that.
But I know too. This is going back way back. But we had a conversation just about what do we do, in 20 years, right?
Yeah.
What is our long term? And I think we do end up going back to having some sort of
physical space. Yeah.
And for me, when I think about the photos that I share, at some point I'd like them to be
In a
the
space.
actual physical
Right.
space, right? I'm just taking an image that I've received from whoever, and then making it a space where you can actually come and see
Right.
these, and then it becomes a resource
Right.
for people. In the case that
Right.
it goes away, but
I think like we are just using a tool that's most accessible to us. Like we don't have money to have a a
yeah,
space.
when I started, I was a junior in college, right?
And then I was a secretary.
So we weren't really in a position to declare like, you know what?
Yeah.
Today I'm gonna make Baja Archives,
Have a museum.
and it's gonna be in a building on Bay Street. That's what I
Right.
want. Like we didn't really have
But
that.
that is the intention
Yeah.
to eventually in some way
Yeah.
have a physical space.
Maybe it'll be.
We'll back up our stuff today, I promise.
Yeah.
Maybe.
That's too funny. Yes.
So a statement and two questions. You collaborate, are you doing the graphics yourself? Or
Me? Yeah.
Yeah. So the
Yeah,
question
somebody
was-
messaged, was just like, hey, I want to talk to the team. I don't know who to talk to. And I was like, thank you that you think that it's a team, but it's just me.
Yeah.
And also,
Yeah.
how are you monetizing it?
Shirts. So yeah, like you buy a shirt, I could continue doing this full time.
And just a statement, in '96, so did the same thing, part of I'm from Cayman.
Okay.
Part of our artist collective, and we did our invitations in our dialect also.
Oh, wow.
Got a big reaction.
Really? That's really
What
cool.
does this mean?
Yeah.
So it was great to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Now we've seen it trickle into
Other
mainstream,
places.
Newspaper and things like that.
Right. Yeah, so
Love that.
that's since I started, I remember like I started and it was like a month later, like corporations were doing like using Bay in their campaign and I was just like, I did that. Like I'm gonna take that credit. So it did make corporations like use it in their commercials and like talking.
Right.
So
a lot of things too, like Bahamian trivia. I remember
right.
when there were more instances of
Trivia and other
inspiring.
spaces.
Way more than female.
Yes,
Male.
Bay is like Bay is so
Like,
much meaning.
Bay is
It's
just
a guy. It's opening to a sentence. It's the closing to a sentence. It's expression, but
Yeah, it's just like it can be you talking to somebody,
Yeah.
you directing something to someone,
Right.
you stub your toe and you're like, "Boy, that hurt."
depends on the
Um,
tone.
Yeah. Yes.
Wonderful presentation. I love your realness. And I was wondering if you have thought, I know you guys are everyone knows so, but if you have thought, given a thought, or have any further engagement about which communities you're reaching out into, possibly finding collaborators and partnerships that could help you.
Right. So just repeating the question there, asking about any partnerships we've had in the communities that we are engaging. Did I capture that? Right. Okay. I think for myself, it's been Tin Furl. I did move away, and so I have now a little bit been disconnected, but just staying, with the Eyes of Bahamian Boy and like in that sense.
I've collaborated with other digital pages. So another page, Baha Reads. She's just an avid
Oh, right.
reader. So we done Bahamian books and collaborated on like Read Bahamian. Have I collaborated with actual? I don't think so.
Well, you just reminded me that I did collaborate with somebody else. Did
Oh, really?
Kunki, Bahamas.
Oh, yeah,
On like
yeah.
Junkanoo and the history of Junkanoo. We just
Right.
did. Have you done? You do
It's tricky.
in-person pop-ups too.
Right. So I would
that would.
I would do pop-ups where I sell merchandise at various what's the word? Like locations. That's like the actual business side of Eyes of Bahamian Bay. But in terms of collaboration, like academically or no.
Well, I'm able to mostly the people that I engage with, right? Like develop.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I do
I see. Sorry, I
yeah, I was like, no. Yeah, so I do pop-up market. So that is where I would sell my merchandise at a location, but I would invite other businesses, other small businesses to come and be a part of it. And I do that because I have a huge reach. So I know that am I answering the question?
Sure.
Okay. I know that like I could, set up my little stall by myself and like have a good turnout, but I could also invite other small businesses that probably only have
Empower.
200 followers and invite them to be a part of the space so they have a broader reach. As for like engaging culturally in
the community.
no. Coming. But I mean, again, like it's just a matter of like I'm one person slowly growing.
Right.
So
And I think something that we've
balancing
talked
that.
about too, and this is like very ambitious, but I think can do it. But I think kind of what you're getting at is like the long term. Do we put these things in curriculums in schools, and like how do you
Right.
get it beyond
just the digital
just the
space.
digital and individuals that even just have access to
Right.
the digital? So that's something I've thought about. I had another thing that I was
Gonna bring
getting
up.
ready to say right there, but let me see if I can quickly. The submissions that I would receive, I think that you've received too. I think is another way we do engage and allow people to contribute to
Right.
what is posted.
Right. But mainly we stay online in our little houses and create.
Yeah, I think I had somebody when I did that Art History Matters. They were like, "Hey, like, can you?" Like, who did you do the video, like, who did your
the video?
I was like, iMovie on Tiara's laptop.
Did it myself.
And I got my friend from high school to record it because he's a voice actor. So,
Right.
And then I know we had two, sorry, go ahead.
Congratulations on excellent presentation and just the work that you are doing.
Thank you.
A lot of
Thank
what
you.
you mentioned, I love because it interrogates and disrupts kind of the teaching, as you said, kind of the traditional way that history is taught in academic spaces or in conventional spaces.
Right.
But it reminds me also that you're reclaiming some of the
Yeah.
old traditions and talk about kind of bringing back mother tongue, bringing back dialects that are So I'm just curious how much, dare I say collaboration, but how much kind of intergenerational reach has this
Oh,
played
wow,
out?
big one.
Talk
Really?
about like your grandmother's
Right.
t-shirt.
Yeah.
Or others, whether it's in your individual life or in community with others connected with your
Right.
mind, to allow for other generations to kind of be seen and heard through your work.
So I just have a question to clarify. Are you talking generation above us or below us or both? Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Should I repeat the question? Sorry. So how are we, or to what capacity are there intergenerational exchanges on our platforms? And I know I'd said like, oh, I have a good one, because I instantly thought of, I posted photographs of downtown Bay Street in the 60s. And my grandma saw it and she was like, oh man, I used to go down there. Da, 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 da. And I was like, well, you never told me that. And do you have photos of that? Can you at least tell me about that
Right.
experience? And she started telling me about a music store that was down there, was a record store. And I was like, this is all so good, right? To be able to get my family, who is not involved in the arts at all or history. I mean, my family's like business and real
Yeah.
estate broadly. So to get her excited about that instantly, when we talk about like intergenerational reach, I know there's people who, when I will post old commercials, and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I remember watching this with my parents," and it brings this idea of nostalgia as well, that connects the parents to their generation, and then hoping that they will share that with the next generation, with their children as well.
Yeah. I think I have both, except Gen Z.
Because they're
They are
on TikTok.
so unique.
And we're
I have
going
not
there.
figured out how to get them, and I feel like I'm close to them, but I'm not. So yeah, I definitely have both sides. Like I have my people who are my grandparents' age or my mom's age who engage. Like they love Eyes of Bahamian Bay because I talk about my experience as a Bahamian and my point of view. So that ranges from learning from my grandmother to learning from my mother to learning from my peers. And I do talk about every aspect. And then I have like submissions.
When you were on TikTok, sorry, I know we collectively spent maybe a month on TikTok.
Yeah.
Just being very
I just had to
transparent.
go.
But I had done a video about Columbus and
Right,
the
the
statue.
statue.
I'd also shown still images of, from the 40s, the 50s. And it had a big reach. And I remember like that younger generation was inspired.
Right.
Was that
I
similar
think
for
that,
you? Or?
yeah, no, so I got, like, I have, like, 4,000 followers on TikTok that
Yeah, just like
they
pops out
came,
of nowhere.
and I was just like, geez, I can't keep this up because it's more visual. It's very visual. It's very comedic. So it requires you to be writing scripts and figuring out, okay, how do I take this history and, like, really write a story from it? So it's definitely a lot more time consuming, but they are there. They are interested. It's just a matter of, okay, I can only do one or the other. So TikTok had to go. But I think acknowledging that as we get older, we will need somebody who's in that generation. And
definitely.
I know, like, I'm gonna need some Gen Zs or Gen X's or
My
whatever.
sibling. I have my younger sibling.
Oh, see
we
that?
good.
I don't have anybody in that generation to like guide me. And I've talked to remember I talked to like some 13-year-olds and I'm like, y'all know Eyes of Bahamian Bay? And they're like, no. I'm like, darn it.
The
And I'm
moment
like-
they say yes, that's
I'm like,
you.
yeah, I'm like, I did it. They're like, no. I'm like, okay, how
That's
do I
funny.
reach y'all? And they said TikTok, and I said, no. But
We're
so,
getting there.
you know where to go to reach that generation. It's just a matter of you have to do it. Right.
Going back to Marie's question, the capture and documentation of those changes. Like
Right.
The informal family.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Are you documenting and capturing that in some media?
No.
Whether it's audio or still photos?
No.
But that is a great thing we can.
We can, and that's the thing. Like we could do it, but it's
Yeah, no, I had
You have to
considered
pick and
that aspect. Yeah,
choose.
of continuing
right.
the archive and making sure those connections.
Right, because like we are the living archive, essentially experiencing how we are changing this narrative, but slow and steady.
And history.
Right. Right. Yeah.
If we could all give a round of applause for our presenter.